recording of this for to share more widely. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for the third session in our volunteer festival for this year, all about shared interest impact studies. So I will be presenting the session along with my colleagues Laura and Harriet. So I'm going to start by giving you a bit of an introduction to what our impact studies are, how we produce them, and then I'll hand over to Harriet and Laura to give you some more information about the two of the studies that we carried out in 2022. So last year's studies. So in 2015, Shared Interest began creating in-depth studies of selected customers and project participants on an annual basis. These case studies are primarily intended to demonstrate impact in two areas, in two ways. That of the financial support that Shared Interest offers to those organisations, but also the wider impact on the livelihoods of smallholder farmers and artisans of their work with the organisations that Shared Interest is lending to. We try to situate this in the broader context of both the country and supply chain involved. So trying to illustrate how the businesses, end buyers and social lenders like Shared Interest work together with these organisations to achieve impact. What makes these studies, which we refer to as longitudinal case studies, quite distinct are a couple of things really, and a couple of things that we have to consider when we are preparing to carry out these studies. The first is that term longitudinal, which really is about time. So really it's about us being able to identify organisations that we have worked with for at least 5 years so that we can demonstrate that longevity of impact, to be able to understand what difference have we really made. And to be able to do that, we really need to be engaging with organisations who we've worked with over a period of time, over a sustained period of time to demonstrate that. Other factors that we consider when selecting which organisations to carry out studies with include communications. So what language or languages might be involved? Are there good communications with those organisations? Do we have the capacity to do that? Are they online, enabling us to carry out conversations online, for example, such as through Zoom or other means? How accessible are they, both for any potential travel from Shared Interest to visit them as part of the case study process, or also for those who we engage in content gathering, so people that might be travelling to the organisations on our behalf to gather photography or short film footage. How accessible is it in terms of the location, but also around the times of year? Are there good seasonal times to try and make that travel happen so that we can avoid any weather conditions that might affect that, but also if we're going to try and gather images of a particular product or commodity, making sure that that's done in a good time so that if we're looking for something that it will be there, it will be present because of the seasonality of these things. We also try and get a balance between the studies across the regions and countries we're working in, as well as commodities. So the 2022 studies that you'll hear about shortly cover coffee and sphagnum moss. And this year, the studies that we're carrying out are looking at honey and cocoa. So we're always trying to get that balance of different commodities there. The studies really form the backbone of how we demonstrate impact, and our communications and marketing materials make very heavy use of these studies, and that's both materials from membership but also from our lending colleagues as well. As we're working to achieve improvement in the livelihood of people as they trade their way out of poverty, these case studies are the main way that we can demonstrate our progress towards achieving this. So the studies take around a year to complete from that initial point of identifying potential organisations, getting those organisations on board in terms of them agreeing to participate, obtaining permission and consent from those organisations themselves, but also the individuals within those organisations who we might want to feature. It's then also about starting to build a picture of these organisations ourselves to start really understanding who they are, what they're doing, what the story might start to emerge through these studies. So how we do that we start off with initial starting point of developing the data that we already have about these organizations. So we'll produce something that looks a little bit like the spreadsheet you can see in front of you, that is really looking to try and capture some of the key indicators of that organization over the different years that we've worked with them. So we'll start, the first year will be the first year that we started working with the organization, all the way through to the present day, and we'll try and capture as much of that indicator information as we can to start to build that picture of the change that that organization has experienced. It's about understanding more, again, about the background of the situation that the organization is in. So understanding more about the background of the commodity in that country. So if, for example, we take coffee in Peru, we would want to understand more about the broader sector in that situation, as well as what is being experienced by the individual customer themselves. So that is an area that we engage volunteers in. Some of you may indeed have supported us with some of that desktop research to assist us in building that background picture, really to put the studies into a wider context when we come to finalise them and give them that perspective, really, of the bigger picture. We also carry out surveys. I'm aware that that image is quite blurry for you. It's just really to give you an indication of the sorts of questions that we would ask in a survey. We draft surveys, and these usually have gone to the producer members or members of the organizations. So it's about drafting the surveys. As you'll see here, this is not in English. This is a survey that was carried out in Spanish. So it's also about translating the surveys, carrying them out with the support of the organizations themselves, where they are able to actually carry out those surveys and get the responses back to us. Data entry can be part of that, and indeed that's another area that volunteers have supported us with in the past when we've received responses, and helping us out with entering that into a spreadsheet so that we can then analyse and process those responses. We also engage the organisations, and particularly key individuals from within those organisations, in interviews. So that process involves identifying who within the organisation we may look to interview, attaining their consent to carry out those interviews, considering any language requirements that might be required, whether we need to involve an interpreter in helping us carry out those interviews, carrying out the interviews, and then analysing the responses. And again, that may also involve some transcription or translation, depending on the nature of language involved in those interviews themselves. I also mentioned content gathering as quite a key part of the studies, and the content gathering is really key to helping us bring the studies alive, really. This helps us give the pictorial narrative to the studies. So the content gathering involves photography, collection of images of the organisation, individuals within the organisation, the sort of the process that might be involved in what the organisation is producing. And also sometimes a number of short films, a bit of film footage that we're able to gather at the same time as well. So again, that's about engaging a content gatherer, someone who's actually able to travel to the organisation to gather that for us. As I mentioned, scheduling that in with harvest times and perhaps seasonal weather that we need to take into account. And indeed, again, getting consent from the individuals involved. And as you can see there, an example of the communication around consent. And obviously, because we're asking for consent from the individuals, we need to be sure that they can understand what we're asking their consent for. So again, that can involve an element of language. And indeed, the example you can see there is in Kenya, Rwanda, to enable us to communicate appropriately with the individuals in the image that you can see there as well. It is then a case of writing everything up, drafting, reviewing, editing, and compiling the final studies. What then happens to the studies is they are included in social accounts. They are woven throughout the social accounts document every year, and the full versions of the studies are included as appendices in the social accounts. We'll be able to share with you details of where you can find the case studies if you haven't already. They are also heavily featured in Quarterly Return, QR. So you can see here an example here of an image, and then inside the issue of the magazine is a fuller article about one of the organisations featured. They also appear in inserts. So when we're looking to engage potential members, they will feature on the materials that we use for that engagement with new audiences, new potential membership audiences. They also make appearances on social media. This is a recent initiative that we carried out with Positive News. This is taken from Twitter and features, you'll see the sphagnum mention of sphagnum moss, which we'll hear a little bit more about shortly. They also can be produced into presentation slides that can be used by colleagues and indeed by volunteers giving presentations and talks to really illustrate the impact of shared interest and really illustrate what we do and the types of organisations we work with. So those are available as well, with a couple of slides each and some background to each of the organisations. So just before I hand over to Harriet and Laura to take you through a little bit more about the two studies from 2022, we are obviously very welcome to hear any feedback from you about how we use the study. So if you have any ideas on kind of different ways that we can use the content from them, do please let us know, and we will obviously share the links to those studies with you at the end of the session, and also in follow-up communications as well. So I'm just now going to hand over to Harriet, who is going to take us through the study that she's going to talk to us about. So over to you, Harriet.
Thanks, Ali, and thank you all for joining us for this session. So the first study that I'm going to talk about is Kouakaka, and Kouakaka are a Rwandan coffee cooperative. So next slide, please. Thank you. So coffee plays a key role in the economy of Rwanda. It's currently grown in most parts of the country and is a source of livelihood for over 400,000 smallholder farmers. So the average size of a coffee farm is around 2.5 acres, and each farm contains on average 200 trees. Most coffee farms are situated at high altitude. I'm sure you will have heard the phrase, Rwanda is the land of 1,000 hills. It truly is. And all of the coffee farms are built onto terraces. But this high altitude is perfect for producing high quality coffee. So in 2016, Rwanda introduced a zoning policy, which means that all coffee farmers are required to sell their coffee to their closest coffee washing station. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation. So in Rwanda, there is also a higher proportion of female coffee farmers when compared with other coffee growing countries. And this is a direct result of the genocide from 1994. So prior to this, it was traditionally men who owned the land and men who farmed the coffee. But following the genocide, sadly, many men died or were imprisoned, and it was the women who were left as the sole breadwinners. So they began to farm on their husband's land. The coffee farms became a place where the women could come together, to talk, to reconcile, and communities could start to repair following the devastation of the genocide. And now it's not uncommon to find women in management positions at drying mills or at cooperatives themselves. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of an overview on Kouakaka. So they are a fair trade certified cooperative founded in 2002. They are located in the southern province of Rwanda, which is around 150 kilometers from the capital, Kigali. So when they started, they began with 867 farmers, and they've now increased to 1,316 members. 297 of these are women. And to be part of this organization, each farmer must have a minimum of 300 coffee trees. So Kouakaka has 3 coffee washing stations, and coffee washing stations are the kind of premises where producers bring their harvested coffee, where it's weighed, and then where they are paid for their product. So after the introduction of the zoning policy, Kouakaka found, at that point, Kouakaka had 2 coffee washing stations. they found that they were losing some of their members as they were now required to take their coffee to washing stations which are closer to where they lived. So as a result of this, they constructed a third coffee washing station, which meant that it was in a closer proximity for many members to reduce their travelling distance, and also enabled Coakaka to increase the volume of coffee that they were able to receive and process. And then in 2018, they built a dry mill, and this enabled them to conduct the first stage of coffee processing, which is the dehusking, and to do that in-house essentially. Previously, they were paying 2 other cooperatives to do this, but by building the dry mill, it decreased their cost of production. So this was a great achievement for the cooperative. Next slide. So Shared Interest first began working with Coakaka in 2013 when we provided them with a credit facility of $200,000. This was to pre-finance their coffee harvest. And Shared Interest were actually the first international finance provider to work with Coakaka. So before securing this facility, Coakaka faced a lot of challenges paying farmers for their coffee each season. They relied on the local bank, but that was often unreliable, or the funds would come late. They used to finance out of their own pocket, essentially, but then that left them short on capital for the coffee processing process. And so production was low and income for members was low. But the facility from Shared Interest enabled them to purchase all of the coffee that their members would sell to them. So in turn, increasing their production volume and increasing their member satisfaction and loyalty. In 2014, we provided them with a term loan to purchase a truck to support them to reduce their cost of production. Prior to this, they were hiring vehicles to transport their coffee from their dry mill up to Kigali at a cost of around £10,000 per year. So this has now halved this cost since they were able to purchase this truck, and they are also hoping to purchase an additional truck to fully remove this production cost. So in 2016, they converted 50% of their original credit facility into a stock facility. This enabled them to continue purchasing coffee from their members, and also meant that they didn't need to take out a loan from the bank, as the interest rate provided by Shared Interest was lower than the rate of the local bank. And then in 2022, they received a second stock facility and export credit for their upcoming coffee harvest season. Next slide. So this is just a slide to run through the coffee production process, which happens at Coakaka. So first of all, the coffee cherries are brought by the farmers to one of the 3 coffee washing stations on the same day that they are harvested. So they are inspected to check that only the mature cherries have been brought, and then weighed, and the farmer paid accordingly. So they then begin the process of washing the cherries. So this removes the outer skin, and they begin to grade the cherries. So the cherries are put through, in this image, put through a pulping machine, which pushes the coffee bean outside of the cherry. And then the machine separates the beans. Any beans that float are removed as that is a sign of defects. After pulping, the coffee is dry fermented before being washed and flushed through these flotation channels. So this process grades the coffee again based on weight. So the coffee beans which sink are the best and are of the highest grade. A second selection then occurs by hand to remove any defects. And then after they've been sorted, they are laid on drying racks for an average 2 weeks to dry, depending on the level of sun and moisture in the air. And when the moisture content reaches between 11 and 12%, the coffee is packaged and labelled, and the beans are then transported in the truck to the dry mill, where they are dehusked and the parchment is removed. And then the final sorting stage is done by hand. And so between July and November, Coakaka employs on average 300 casual workers. 95% of these are women at the dry mill, who sort the coffee by hand and to remove any beans which are damaged by pests or disease. So this final stage ensures that the coffee being sent to the buyer is of the best quality. And then the final product is bagged and transported to Kigali in the truck, where it's loaded up and then taken to the port, Mombasa in Kenya, before being shipped off to the buyers. Next slide, please. Thank you. So with the support from the Fairtrade Premium and other organisations, Coakaka has been able to implement a number of social impact projects, both to support their membership, but also to support their wider community. So below are just 3 examples, but you can read more in the full report. So in 2007, they received an interest-free loan from a rural enterprise development project funded by USAID. And this was used to buy bicycles for their members who lived in the more remote areas. So before this, producers would bring the coffee cherries to the coffee washing stations in sacks, often carried on their head. And on average, each bag would weigh around 30 kilograms. So the bikes were sold to members who paid them off using the income from their coffee harvest over a period of 3 years. And in total, 400 bikes were distributed. And on a bike, a farmer can carry between 200 and 400 kilograms of cherries. So it really made a significant difference and reduced the number of journeys that the farmers had to take with their product. In 2021, Coakaka constructed a new road, so that was a 1.25 kilometre road, which connects one of their main coffee washing stations with the main highway. So before this, the road was in real disrepair and was unable to be travelled on by trucks or really even by bicycles. But this road means that the trucks can easily access the coffee washing station to collect the product. And then finally, Coakaka have also established a nursery. So each year they prepare 20,000 coffee seedlings, which they receive from the Rwanda Agricultural Board. And working with their agronomists, they distribute the seeds depending on the need of the individual farmers. So farmers are supported to expand their farms and replace old and aging trees. Slide, please. Women's development is a key priority of Coakaka, and they've implemented a number of projects to increase opportunities for women in the coffee sector. The most prominent being their Women in Coffee project, which was developed in 2014. So currently there are 652 women involved in the project. The women receive training, inputs and resources to produce coffee. All of the coffee that they produce is processed at the same coffee washing station to ensure traceability. And this means that the coffee is able to be marketed and sold as women-grown coffee, which earns the group an additional premium. Next slide, please. And finally, just to conclude, I thought I would share the story of Marie-Claire. So Marie-Claire is a member of Coakaka and also a participant of the Women in Coffee project. So she began farming coffee in 2005, and she received her first plot of land from her parents, where she planted 324 trees. And then she since joined the Women in Coffee project, and she told us about her motivation to be part of this project. She said that although we owned coffee farms, we didn't have much say on them. But when the project of Coffee for Women came, as women, we were encouraged to have access to and ownership of our farms. That encouraged us to put in more effort, knowing the fields were ours. Since joining Coakaka, Marie-Claire has increased the number of trees on her farm to 720, and over half of these are organic. And with the increased income she now makes from her coffee, Marie-Claire has been able to make improvements in her life. She said that changes are here, resulting from the cooperative and resulting from the women's group. We learn to plant agroforestry trees that add more shade to the coffee fields, and we learn proper mulching techniques and proper techniques to apply manure. Other changes: I own a cow and I got it from coffee farming. I also own a house. It was in pretty bad shape, but I was able to modestly renovate it thanks to coffee farming. Coffee farming has led me to good achievements. I never lack insurance for my children, for my family, and my children can't lack food as a result of working on the coffee farm. So yes, there is change. And that concludes my section on Coakaka. So I can hand over now to Laura to talk about Incomoss.
Thanks, Harriet, and hi everyone. It's lovely to see you all here today, so thank you for joining us. So the second study we're going to talk about today is a study on Inca moss, who are one of our customers producing sphagnum moss based in Peru. So over the past decade, hunger and poverty have significantly decreased in Peru following consistent economic growth, investment in infrastructure, education and health, as well as an expansion of social programs. However, despite this, according to the National Statistics Institute, 8.55 million Peruvians suffered poverty in 2021. The rates of poverty and exclusion in rural areas are more pronounced, especially in the highlands, which is the area where Inca moss are actually based. The International Fund for Agricultural Development suggests that rural poverty rates are 3 times those of urban areas. And in these rural areas, 50% of children and adolescents and 46% of youth, which is the age 20 to 29 years of age, live in poverty. In the Andean Highlands at 3,200 meters above sea level, this forms one of the most challenging terrains to farm. The challenge of growing agricultural production while also conserving or improving the natural environment is becoming increasingly important. And in this region, women are traditionally responsible for livestock management as well as looking after their household. Historically, the challenging altitudes and landscapes severely limit their income opportunities. So that's where sphagnum moss comes in. So this white moss grows wild in the Andean highlands. However, many of these communities prior to Inca moss really saw this moss that covered their landscape as a nuisance. And traditionally, they burnt it away to clear the land for planting traditional crops such as potatoes. And this practice not only deprived these communities of an additional income and more profitable source of income, it degraded the soil, destroying natural nutrients and making it infertile after 2 or 3 harvests. Now, the moss is a protected natural resource in Peru, and it cannot be harvested without permission from the national government. So Inca moss, with the help of social enterprise Inca moss, these communities are now learning that the moss can provide them with an additional income when it is harvested in the right way. Inca moss was formed in 2010 by a gentleman called Marco Pinatelli, who met a moss pioneer, Anton Becker, while out on vacation. Inca moss is a B Corp in recognition of the high environmental and social impact standards it applies to its operations, as well as showing public transparency. And today, the organisation is working with over 38 communities in the Andean Highlands, supporting almost 3,000 people. And 64% of the producers they are currently working with are female. So looking at food insecurity, it's an issue in rural regions, and many smallholder farmers produce basic crops, mostly potato at a subsistence level. And Inca moss comes in to offer training to these communities to learn to teach them how they can supplement their income from potato farming by collecting the moss in a way that complements the natural ecosystem. Inca moss purchase the moss from the collectors at a fair price and helps them sell it internationally for various uses, mainly horticulture, to add nutrients to the soil. With 2/3 of the harvesters being women, this additional employment makes a huge difference to families who now earn 27% more in their annual income. Also, as a result, there's fewer men migrating to the city looking for work, and women are also able to earn their own money alongside caring for their livestock still. The Inca moss has been a shared interest customer since 2017. They've received loans to pre-finance the harvest, meaning that they can pay the moss harvesters all year round for delivery of the moss to their factory. They are also, Inca Moss are also working in partnership with our charitable arm, Shared Interest Foundation. And there is a project currently running to support over 1,100 farmers to begin harvesting the moss. This project started in March 2022, and it's supporting women in 5 different communities and helping protect almost 6,000 hectares of land. Farmers receive training in sustainable harvesting and conservation techniques, and they will also be provided with tools and equipment to help them in their moss harvesting. So Shared Interest Finance, along with the support from Shared Interest Foundation, is helping Inca Moss to support an increasingly number of communities and rural areas in navigating the challenges that they face. It's helping building their resilience by providing a stable income, offering environmental training and improving infrastructure. Since working with Shared Interest, Inca Moss have increased the number of harvesters they're working with from 1,900 to almost 3,000, and sales of moss have increased from 80 metric tons to 120 metric tons. As Inca Moss's provision continues to grow, we hope that more communities will discover the value of the moss and the families will remain united in their work. We spoke to Inca Moss impact manager, and he said that this additional employment is making a huge difference to families, meaning that fewer men are migrating to the city and women are able to own their own income. The next slide, please, Sally. Thank you. So what is sphagnum moss? It is an internationally traded commodity, with Canada being the currently biggest exporter. Sphagnum moss produced in Peru is harvested live and then dried, contributing around 5,300 metric tons a year to the export market. The moss is a valuable commodity. It acts as a natural antibacterial, a humidity collector, and absorbs heavy metals. The absorbency of the moss makes it useful for potting exotic plants like orchids, but more recently it's been recognised for its environmentally friendly water filtration properties. The moss grows at high altitudes and is collected by the local communities living amidst challenging climatic conditions, including the weather phenomenon referred to as El Nino, which occurs every few years when a vast pool of water in the western tropical Pacific Ocean becomes abnormally warm. The effects of this on Peruvian central mountains are periods of heavy rain, which make the harvesting a lot more complex. When the moss gets wet, it absorbs a lot of water. It can become twice as heavy for the harvesters to carry up and down the sort of sides of the mountain, which is obviously very challenging for them. And there is, from speaking to the producers, there's no doubt that climate change is having a really complex and fundamental impact on the moss harvesters, working already in a region that experiences erratic weather patterns. Impact manager Juanjo said to us, the effects of climate change in the Andean region have been particularly notorious when it comes to the duration of the rainy season. He said that every year that passes, the rain starts earlier and lasts longer, which directly affects the community's annual work schedule and makes them prone to rely on environmentally harmful practices like burning of the moss to supplement the region's income. I've got the next slide, please, Sally. Thank you. So thinking about the sustainability of the moss, it's really important to Inca Moss to make the model as sustainable as possible, and that's been a focus since the beginning of the organisation. In order to both protect the natural ecosystem of the region and ensure that the communities can always count on the moss as a constant source of income. So during 2021, Inca Moss manufactured and sold 120 metric tons of moss to customers in the international market. Based on their current plans of expansion, they're aiming to double this number by the end of 2024. And over the years, Inca Moss have made multiple trips to have a clear idea of the volume of moss that exists in the area, and they work very closely with an organisation called Senfo, who is in charge of supervising the correct use of the moss to ensure that it is harvested as sustainably as possible and doesn't cause any damage to the natural ecosystem. Senfo has estimated that in Peru there are currently almost 6,000 metric tons of moss which grow naturally. And as part of their role, they approve management plans which are required to legally harvest the moss, which is something that Inca Moss takes care of for the moss producers. And how it all works to ensure the sustainability of the moss, Senfo only allows for 1/6 of the volume of moss to be harvested, and that amounts become the base of which Inca Moss works. Over the past 12 years, Inca Moss have been working with multiple communities of Peru and made an impact on the lives of thousands of people. And if we go to the next slide, please, Sally. We've just got a short video here, which will show you some of the moss producers who Inca Moss are currently working with.
Montalvo, soy de la comunidad de Tambillo y llevo 5 años sacando musgo, y el musgo me ayuda económicamente para los alimentos, y me gustaría ahorrar para adelante, para un futuro, para tener mis propios animales.
Me llamo María Mendoza Ramos, tengo 32 años y soy de Tambillo. 15 años estamos cosechando shampoo y sembramos papa, granadilla, rocoto y shampoo. Antes quemábamos, ahora ya no quemamos shampoo y estamos protegiendo ese shampoo.
Vamos.
Bien, mi nombre es William Usquiano Baltasar. Soy del anexo de Tambillo y nos dedicamos a la agricultura. Nos dedicamos también a la cosecha de musgo. ¿Para qué? Para apoyar en la semilla, en compra del abono. Y ¿cómo se llama? Soy una autoridad que yo tengo el cargo, soy el comité de presidente del musgo. Y donde ahorita también queremos hacer una posta médica para ser atendido cercano, porque la salida es muy lejos de nosotros, a un distrito para salir. Y eso ahorita queremos muchos más necesidades tiene el pueblo de Tambillo, la comunidad.
De todo, muy buenos días, ¿no? Yo me llamo Anaíd Valdés Santiago, soy de acá del anexo de Tambillo. Crecido, nacido, yo me dedico acá a la cosecha de musgo hace 15 años, ¿no? Con mi familia, para que nosotros nos solventamos del musgo. Y con ese tenemos que comprar para los alimentos de casa, creo mis pachos, para las semicinas. Y así junto con mi familia nos compartimos, y también, ¿no? Para que no falta nada en casa, para unirnos con todo, con familia.
Thanks, Ali. So that hopefully gives that those films were gathered as part of the photography and film for the content gathering, which we did in the region of Tambilio, which is one of the communities where Inca Moss is based. So that hopefully just gives a nice representation of the people that Inca Moss are working with. So Fiorella, who you saw in the video just now, lives in the region of Tambilio, which is approximately a 2-hour walk from the area where the harvesters are currently collecting the moss. But those areas do move, so obviously those distances those change based on the harvest seasons. At the moment, the harvesters reach this area by horse, which takes around an hour. If horses are not available, they travel to the moss collecting area by foot each day. Fiorella lives with her parents and siblings, as well as her aunt and uncle. The family mainly work in agriculture, tending cattle, as well as working as moss harvesters. She said that the main challenge she had seen in the community is that the children can now get the proper food that they need to be healthy, and that the community as a whole has an additional source of income to cover the needs we have. And since working with Inca Moss, Fiorella told us the moss is something that is helping me economically, because it allows me to afford the purchase of food products and also clothing. I no longer struggle to buy the food that my family requires. And Fiorella also told us she was training to be a nurse, and she would like to be able to finish her training and use the knowledge to provide support to the community that she lives in. I've got to go to the next slide, please, Sally. Thank you. And this, I'll just leave you with the goal of Inca Moss, which I think is really quite aspirational. So the mission of the organisation, our goal is to improve the quality of life in the populations of the areas of influence of our economic activities through inclusion, sustainable and inclusive social and economic development. The sphagnum moss is a true privilege that nature gives us, and we work hard to take care of the process of our magical product. We are a family committed to the environmental well-being and to the future of us all. And on this slide, you can also see there's just a link to view the full case studies. If anyone would like to explore more, they are available on our website, so you can access those there. And yeah, I'll pass over for any questions.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Harriet. I've just stopped screen sharing there so we can see people for questions. We will share that link in the follow-up communications to this session, so don't worry if you didn't get a chance to make a note of that to see the studies in full. But hopefully that gave you a bit of an overview of how we produce the studies, but also a bit more detail on the Kawakaka and Inca Moss studies from last year. We have some time for some questions. If anybody has any, feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask your questions. So over to you, really, if you've got any questions for us. Sorry, I saw Susan. Hi, sorry, your raised hand jumped out as I skipped through. Thank you.
Thank you both. Well, all three of you, but particularly Laura and Harriet. Such really vivid pictures that were really helpful. Did either of you actually visit the areas? Because your detail sounds as though you really lived there.
So I did have the opportunity to go as part of a wider visit to East Africa. We visited a number of foundation projects as well as this. And so, yeah, it was a great privilege to be able to visit, and it really helped to kind of bring to life some of the stories that we were seeing. And I think there is no substitute really for being able to be on the ground and kind of physically see and understand the context, the landscape, the distances between farms and coffee washing stations, all of that really I had quite little knowledge of. So to be able to go and visit and speak to some of the people that we interviewed, it definitely was a real privilege and a great opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
And for the Inca Moss study, no, I didn't visit. unfortunately. But we had really close communication with Juan Ho, who is the impact manager at Incamos, and he so really helped us understand sort of the challenges of the region. Yeah, unfortunately not, but yeah, I think we've kind of still been immersed, I think, in the study, and because of that great connection that we have with the customer, hopefully that's still brought that out in the study.
I think that's one of the blessings of modern day communication, that you are able to get such a real picture and share it. Although we've read the stories in Quarterly Return, it's brought to life when you hear people talking like that, both of you really bringing it to life and making us understand some more detail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Susan Jonas, we've got a question from you now. Thank you.
Now, I was just wondering, we have sphagnum moss in peat bogs in this country. Does the sphagnum moss form part of peat bogs in the Peruvian highlands? Is it sort of like it is here or not?
Yeah, so I believe it is. So it from what research we found out, it kind of grows abundantly in the Andean highlands. But yeah, so it's used for various purposes, for as you say, how it kind of grows here, and it's some of it is, a lot of it shipped to North America to be used for horticulture and hanging baskets and in orchids. But Juanjo actually told us a really great story about how the moss was kind of growing in areas, and if the moss collectors were kind of walking and were caught without water, they knew that the water that was in the where there was moss kind of in a pool, that would be naturally filtered water, because they already knew that it acted as a natural water filter.
So the harvesting of the sphagnum moss is not harming the sort of ecology of the area. Like we've been busy digging out peat, and people are trying to stop that. So they're just harvesting a certain amount of moss.
So it's actually complementing the natural ecosystem for them because of the way they harvest it. So prior to Incamos sort of coming in and teaching these communities about the properties of the moss, they were burning the moss away and sort of damaging the land. But because they're working closely with SENFOR, the state organisation, who really control how much moss is collected, and they can only cut the moss to a certain length. And then this is why they have to move around certain areas as well. So they'll harvest one area and then they'll leave that area for a certain period of time to give the moss enough time to grow back. So it's just like a repeated kind of cycle.
And also just to add on to that, because Juanjo featured in one of our member events recently, and there was actually a question asked about peat, which is the only reason I know the answer. But he was basically saying that the moss is anything that is above the ground is what is harvested, whereas they class the peat as kind of the roots that are just below the surface. So that isn't actually removed. It's only the product that is above the surface of the ground that they cut and take. So for that reason, the nutrients and the fertility of the soil is preserved.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Laura and Harriet, for the response there. That's great. Thank you.
A very basic question about the cutting of the moss. Is it done with knives, scissors, or something similar, or do they actually just break it off? That was intriguing.
I believe they just break it off.
Right.
Yeah. Have you heard any different on that, Harriet? I believe they just break it off, and it's packed into sacks. And they try to do most of the harvesting when the moss is as dry as possible, because it absorbs so much water. So I think it dry bag of moss will weigh about 20 kilograms, where a wet bag of moss will weigh about 60. But yeah, from what we've seen from the conversations we've had and the films and the photography, it's just broken off by hand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. If there aren't any more questions, we will say thank you very much to you all. If you do have follow-up questions, once you've had a chance to navigate to the website to find the studies and have any other questions for us, do just let us know. You can drop them through to an email to us, volunteers@shared-interest.com, and we'll pass those through to Laura or Harriet if they're specific to those, or myself if it's generally about the case studies and how we produce them. But thank you all very much for your interest this afternoon. It is, as we say, these studies really do form quite a key part in how we communicate about the work that Shared Interest does. So we appreciate your interest in what we're doing with them. And thank you for your time this afternoon. Hopefully you'll be able to join us for some of our sessions tomorrow, but we will be recording them as well. So if you're not able to join us, keep an eye out for the recordings, which will be coming out in due course. So thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.